The thermometer in Elena's hand read 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. She stared at the digital display, waiting for the numbers to shift, to reveal themselves as some cruel trick of her exhausted mind. They remained constant, impossible, and terrifyingly real. Dr. Vasquez. The voice belonged to Cassius Blackmore, the estate's patriarch whose pale skin seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. I understand your hesitation to accept what you're witnessing. Elena set the thermometer aside and reached for her stethoscope, her movements mechanical, practiced. 20 years of forensic pathology had taught her to compartmentalize, to treat each body as a puzzle to be solved rather than a person who had once laughed and dreamed and feared the dark. But this child, this impossibly preserved girl who couldn't be more than 12, was different. The stethoscope's cold metal touched porcelain skin, and Elena's breath caught. The heartbeat was slow, perhaps 30 beats per minute, but steady and strong. She closed her eyes, counting the rhythm, hoping her tired mind was playing tricks. When she opened them, 5 other figures stood in the shadows beyond the candlelight, their eyes reflecting the flames like cat's eyes in the dark. How long has she been like this? Elena's voice echoed off the stone walls, professional despite the tremor she couldn't quite suppress. 3 days, Cassius replied. We found her in the ritual chamber below. The ceremony was interrupted. Elena's pen hovered over her notepad. In her normal world, the world of police stations and morgues and fluorescent lights, she would be documenting time of death, cause of death, identifying marks. Here, surrounded by beings who claimed to have lived for centuries, those familiar protocols seemed absurd. What kind of ceremony? She forced herself to meet Cassius's ancient gaze. Before he could answer, a sound echoed from the darkness beyond the crypt's entrance, the soft padding of bare feet on stone. The vampires tensed, and Elena noticed how they positioned themselves between her and the approaching footsteps. Their protectiveness felt more ominous than comforting. She should be in her chambers, one of them whispered, a woman with silver hair that gleamed like moonlight. Lily, Cassius said, his voice carrying a warning. Return to your room. But the child who emerged from the shadows ignored the command entirely. She couldn't have been more than 10, with dark curls framing a heart-shaped face and eyes that held far too much knowledge for her apparent age. When those eyes fixed on the body lying on the marble slab, they filled with tears that caught the candlelight like liquid diamonds. She's not dead. The words burst from Lily with desperate fury. I keep telling you, she's not dead. She's trapped. Elena watched the girl approach the slab, noting the way she moved, too fluid, too controlled for a child, yet with an underlying grief that was heartbreakingly human. When Lily reached out to touch the still figure's hand, Elena saw something that made her scientific skepticism waver. The supposedly dead girl's fingers twitched. Did you see? Elena began. Yes, Cassius said grimly. We all saw. Elena pulled out her portable EEG machine, her hands working quickly to attach the electrodes to the girl's temples. The familiar weight of scientific equipment steadied her, gave her something concrete to focus on, while her worldview crumbled around the edges. The machine hummed to life, and within moments, lines of brain activity scrolled across the small screen. Theta waves, the pattern of someone in deep sleep or meditation, not the flat line of death. This is impossible, Elena whispered, but even as she spoke, she was reaching for her phone to capture the readout. Documentation was her anchor in chaos, the one thing that had never failed her. Dr. Vasquez, Lily said. And something in the child's voice made Elena look up from her instruments. She looks like someone you know, doesn't she? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She had been trying not to think about it, trying to maintain professional distance, but Lily was right. The girl on the slab had the same delicate bone structure as Elena's daughter Sophia, the same dark lashes against pale cheeks. Sophia, who would have been 28 now if the cancer hadn't taken her 10 years ago. Sophia, who had died in a sterile hospital room, while Elena held her hand and promised her that everything would be all right. Her name is Arya, Lily continued, her small hand still clasping the supposedly dead girl's fingers. She came here 3 weeks ago. The Coven said they were going to help her, give her a new kind of life. But something went wrong. Elena stared at the EEG readout, at the evidence that a mind was somehow still functioning in a body that should have been beyond saving. Her daughter's face flickered in her memory, overlaying itself on the features of the girl before her. What exactly did they do to her? Elena asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. In the dancing shadows, the ancient vampires exchanged glances heavy with secrets. The silence that followed Elena's question stretched like a taut wire, thick with unspoken truths and centuries of carefully guarded secrets. She could feel the weight of ancient eyes upon her, calculating, measuring her worthiness to hear whatever terrible answer lay behind their exchanged glances. "The ritual of eternal preservation," Cassius finally said, his voice carrying the weight of reluctant revelation. "It was meant to transition her gently, to spare her the violent hunger that comes with our kind of rebirth." Elena's forensic training kicked in, her mind automatically cataloguing details while her heart recoiled from their implications. Transition her? She was dying? Leukemia, Lily whispered, her small fingers still entwined with Arya's motionless ones. Just like... Enough. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her pale hand settling on Lily's shoulder with gentle firmness. The child speaks too freely. But the damage was done. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as the parallel struck her with devastating clarity. Sophia had fought leukemia for 3 years before the disease finally claimed her. Elena remembered those final weeks, the desperate searches for experimental treatments, the willingness to try anything that might save her daughter's life, if someone had offered her an alternative, any alternative, to watching Sophia waste away. "You're telling me her parents brought her here to become a vampire?" Elena's voice cracked on the last word, the scientific skeptic in her still rebelling against the impossibility of the conversation. "A mother," Cassius corrected. "A woman who had exhausted every medical option, who faced the choice between watching her daughter die or giving her a chance at a different kind of existence." Elena's phone buzzed against her hip, a jarring intrusion from the normal world that felt impossibly distant now. She glanced at the screen reflexively and saw a text from her research assistant back in Edinburgh. "Wondered if you were still planning to review the Morrison case files tomorrow?" The department's been asking. The Morrison case. A straightforward, vehicular fatality that she'd been examining for the prosecutor's office. Evidence collection, tissue analysis, straightforward cause of death determination. The kind of work that had defined her life for 2 decades, methodical and logical and safely contained within the boundaries of what was scientifically possible. She looked up from the phone to find Lily watching her with those impossibly knowing eyes. "You want to go back," the child said softly. "Back to your normal life where dead means dead, and miracles don't happen in crypts." Elena's throat tightened. The truth was more complicated than that. Yes, part of her wanted to flee back to her sterile laboratory, to lose herself in microscopic tissue samples and toxicology reports. But another part, the part that had never fully healed from Sophia's death, was transfixed by the impossible hope represented by the girl on the marble slab. "What I want," Elena said carefully, "is to understand what happened here. If this child is truly alive, if there's brain activity, then there might be a way to..." "To what?" The silver-haired woman, Celeste, Elena recalled from the introductions, moved closer, her presence suddenly predatory. "To rescue her, to take her back to your hospitals where they will fail her just as they failed your daughter." The words hit like a physical blow, and Elena found herself stepping back instinctively. "How do you—" "We know about Sophia," Cassius said, his ancient voice carrying an unexpected note of sympathy. "We know about the experimental treatments, the clinical trials, the final months when hope became a cruelty. We know why you've buried yourself in examining the dead, rather than trying to heal the living." Elena's hands began to shake. In her normal world, her colleagues respected her professional boundaries, never prying into the personal tragedy, that had driven her from pediatric pathology to forensic work. Here, her most private pain was laid bare by creatures who claimed to have watched centuries pass. "Dr. Vasquez," Lily's voice drew her attention back to the motionless figure on the slab. "Aria's been trapped for 3 days. Every hour that passes, she slips further away. In your world, with your machines and your medicines, could you bring someone back from this?" Elena stared at the EEG readout still scrolling across her portable monitor. The theta wave patterns were weakening, she realized with growing alarm. Whatever consciousness remained in the girl was fading. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from her assistant, then one from the police detective handling the Morrison case. The ordinary world pulling at her, demanding her return to familiar routines and explicable deaths. But here was Aria, caught between life and death in a way that defied everything Elena thought she knew about biology and medicine. Here was a child who might yet be saved, if Elena could bridge the gap between her scientific knowledge and the supernatural forces that had created this impossible situation. "If I stay," Elena heard herself saying, "if I help you try to save her, what happens to my life back home?" In the candlelit shadows, the ancient vampires smiled, and Elena wasn't sure whether their expressions held promise or threat. The ancient vampires' smiles faded as a sound shattered the crypt's oppressive silence. Elena's phone ringing with the shrill urgency of her normal world, intruding upon the impossible. The caller ID displayed Chief Inspector Morrison, and Elena knew without answering that her absence had been noticed, that questions were being asked about her failure to appear at the scheduled case review. "Answer it," Cassius said, his voice carrying a strange mixture of challenge and invitation. "Tell them where you are. Tell them what you found." Elena's finger hovered over the decline button, but something in his tone made her hesitate. Around the crypt, the other vampires had gone perfectly still, their ancient faces masks of expectancy. Even Lily looked up from Aria's motionless form, her dark eyes reflecting an understanding far beyond her apparent years. The phone fell silent, then immediately began ringing again. "They're persistent," Celeste observed, her silver hair catching the candlelight as she tilted her head. "Your colleagues, they depend on your expertise, don't they? Your ability to make sense of death, to provide answers that allow the living to sleep peacefully in their beds." "Dr. Vasquez," Lily whispered urgently, "look at the machine." Elena's gaze snapped to the EEG monitor, and her breath caught. The theta wave patterns weren't just weakening. They were fluctuating wildly, spiking and diving in response to the phone's electronic intrusion. The digital readings jumped erratically, 94.7 degrees, then 101.2, then back to an impossible 98.6. "The technology is interfering with her," Elena said, her scientific mind racing to process the implications. "The electromagnetic field from the phone. It's disrupting whatever's keeping her conscious." She quickly powered down the device, but the damage was apparent. Aria's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the steady rise and fall of her chest became more labored. On the monitor, the brain activity patterns grew fainter, more irregular. "You see?" Cassius stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the confined space. "Your world and ours cannot coexist. The very instruments you rely upon are poison to what she has become." Elena stared at the weakening readouts, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Every instinct she'd developed over 2 decades of forensic work screamed at her to document everything, to gather evidence, to approach this mystery with the methodical precision that had defined her career. But those same methods were literally killing the girl she might be able to save. "There's something else," Lily said, her voice barely audible above the ancient stone's oppressive silence. "Something they haven't told you about the ritual." The adult vampires tensed visibly, and Celeste's hand moved to silence the child, but Lily continued speaking with desperate urgency. It wasn't just meant to save Aria. They were trying to create something new, a bridge between your world and ours. Someone who could survive in both, who could help them understand how to— "Lily." Cassius's voice carried centuries of absolute authority, but the child had already said enough. Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. You've done this before, she said, backing toward the crypt's entrance. Other children. Other desperate parents. That's why you knew exactly which buttons to push with me. Why you know so much about Sophia. Dr. Vasquez, please. Lily's pleas stopped Elena's retreat toward the door. Whatever they've done before, Aria is different. She's fighting it. She's trying to come back, but she needs someone who understands both worlds. Someone like you. The EEG monitor emitted a sharp alarm. The brainwave patterns were flatlining. Elena watched the digital readout with growing horror as Aria's temperature began dropping rapidly, 96.4, 94.8, 92.1. If you leave now, Cassius said quietly, she dies within the hour. If you stay, if you help us complete what was started, she might live, but you'll never be able to return to your old life unchanged. The knowledge we share with you will make your previous work impossible. How do you examine ordinary death when you've witnessed the supernatural? Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. Elena, where are you? The chief inspector is asking questions. Please respond ASAP. She looked at the message, then at Aria's failing vital signs, then at Lily's desperate face. In her mind, she saw Sophia's final moments, the peaceful acceptance, the gentle letting go that medical science had facilitated but could not prevent. Here was another child, another chance, another impossible decision between the known world of professional obligation and the unknown realm of supernatural possibility. The temperature reading dropped to 89.3 degrees. Elena made her choice. She powered off her phone completely, removed the battery, and set it aside on the stone floor. Tell me everything, she said to Cassius, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was abandoning. Tell me exactly what you did to her, and what we need to do to bring her back. In the sudden silence, Aria drew in a shuddering breath, and the EEG patterns strengthened. But even as the words left her mouth, Elena felt the crushing weight of what she had just committed to. The battery from her phone lay on the stone floor like a discarded piece of her former life, and with it, any hope of returning to the methodical, rational world she had inhabited for the past 20 years. Her hands began to shake as the full implications crashed over her. Dr. Elena Vasquez, respected forensic pathologist, published researcher, expert witness in dozens of murder trials. What was she now? A middle-aged woman standing in a crypt, asking ancient vampires how to resurrect the dead. Dr. Vasquez? Lily's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? Elena realized she had been staring at the dismantled phone for several long moments, her breathing shallow and rapid. The familiar symptoms of a panic attack were building, the tightness in her chest, the sensation that the stone walls were pressing closer together. I need a moment, she managed, backing toward the crypt's entrance. I need to think about this. There is no time for thinking, Celeste said sharply. The child's life force is ebbing. Each second you hesitate. Don't. Elena's voice cracked with sudden fury. Don't you dare try to manipulate me with guilt. I've spent 10 years blaming myself for not being able to save my daughter. I won't be rushed into another impossible situation where a child's life depends on my making the right choice. The crypt fell silent except for the faint beeping of the EEG monitor and Aria's labored breathing. Elena pressed her back against the cold stone wall, trying to find some anchor in the familiar sensation of solid matter, of things that could be measured and understood. But even that comfort was tainted now. How many autopsies had she performed on these same kinds of stones? How many times had she stood over a body, confident in her ability to read the story written in tissue and bone? Now she wondered if she had missed signs, overlooked evidence of the impossible because it didn't fit her scientific worldview. What if I'm wrong? The words escaped before she could stop them. What if this is all some elaborate delusion brought on by exhaustion and grief? What if I'm having a complete psychological breakdown in some perfectly ordinary morgue, and none of this is real? Cassius moved closer, but stopped when Elena flinched away from his approach. Your scientific training demands proof, he said, but some truths exist beyond the reach of instruments and analysis. You felt it the moment you entered this place. You recognized something in Arya that your equipment could not measure. Elena's gaze drifted to the girl on the marble slab. Even in the candlelight, the resemblance to Sophia was unmistakable, not just physical, but something deeper. The same stubborn tilt to her chin, the same slight frown that Sophia had worn during her illness, as if she were solving a difficult puzzle even in unconsciousness. "I don't know how to help her," Elena whispered. "I'm a pathologist, not a whatever this situation requires. I study death, not this liminal state between life and something else entirely. My expertise is useless here." "Is it?" Lily's small hand slipped into Elena's, startling her with its warmth. "You understand dying better than anyone. Arya is dying, but slowly, in a way that gives us a chance to pull her back. Isn't that exactly what you always wished you could do for Sophia? Have more time, more options, more hope?" The question hit like a knife between her ribs. Elena had replayed Sophia's final weeks countless times, torturing herself with what-if scenarios. What if they had tried the experimental treatment in Munich? What if they had pursued the clinical trial in Houston? What if she had been a better mother, a better doctor, a better human being deserving of a miracle? But this wasn't Sophia. This was a stranger's child, caught up in supernatural forces that Elena barely comprehended. And yet, "The ritual you mentioned," Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "How exactly does it work? What are the physiological mechanisms involved?" Cassius exchanged a glance with Celeste before answering. "The transformation requires a complete suspension of normal biological processes, followed by a careful reintegration of enhanced systems. Think of it as replacing the engine of a car while it continues to drive." That's not an explanation, that's a metaphor. Elena's scientific training reasserted itself, providing familiar ground. "I need to understand the actual process. What substances were used? What was the timeline? How exactly did things go wrong?" But even as she asked the questions, another part of her mind was screaming warnings. She was normalizing the impossible, treating supernatural transformation as if it were merely an exotic medical procedure. The Elena Vasquez of 3 hours ago would have called for psychiatric evaluation. The Elena Vasquez of 3 hours ago would never have removed the battery from her phone, cutting herself off from the rational world. That Elena Vasquez had also never had a chance to save a dying child. The silence stretched between them like a held breath, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of Elena's monitor and the whisper of Arya's shallow respirations. Elena stared at the ancient faces surrounding her, realizing that her questions had irrevocably crossed a line. She was no longer the skeptical outsider demanding proof, she was a participant seeking knowledge. "The ritual began 3 nights ago," Cassius said, his voice taking on the cadence of confession. "Arya's mother brought her to us in the final stages of neuroblastoma. The cancer had metastasized throughout her nervous system. Even your most advanced treatments had failed." Elena's clinical mind automatically catalogued the implications. Neuroblastoma in children was particularly aggressive, often resistant to conventional therapy. She had performed autopsies on too many small bodies ravaged by the disease. "We use a venom," Celeste continued, producing a small crystal vial from the folds of her dark robes. The liquid inside moved with an oily, prismatic shimmer that hurt to look at directly. Derived from creatures that exist in the spaces between life and death, it destroys the human immune system completely, allowing supernatural physiology to take root. "But Arya fought it," Lily interjected, her grip tightening on Elena's hand. Her body accepted the venom, but her mind rejected the transformation. She's trapped in the transition, neither fully human nor vampire. Elena forced herself to process this information clinically, even as every rational instinct rebelled. "So, the neurological activity I'm detecting, that's her consciousness refusing to relinquish its original state?" "Precisely." Cassius nodded with what might have been approval. "In successful transformations, the human personality dissolves gradually, replaced by vampire consciousness. But Arya's mind has created barriers, protective mechanisms that prevent the final stage." The EEG monitor suddenly spiked, sharp peaks of delta waves indicating deep distress. Arya's body convulsed once, a violent tremor that made the marble slab ring like a bell. When the spasm passed, her skin had taken on a bluish pallor. "She's dying," Elena said, the words emerging with automatic professional detachment. Then the human reality crashed over her. She's actually dying right now. "Yes," Cassius said simply. "The venom requires complete commitment to the transformation. Her resistance is creating a feedback loop that will destroy both her human and supernatural systems within hours." Elena stared at the failing readouts, her mind racing through possibilities. Everything she knew about cellular biology suggested this situation should be impossible, yet here it was, happening in real time. A child caught between two incompatible forms of existence, fighting a battle that would kill her regardless of the outcome. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Elena's voice sounded hollow in the stone chamber. "I'm a forensic pathologist, not a pediatric oncologist. I don't save lives, I investigate deaths." "But you understand the boundary," Lily said urgently. "You've spent years studying the exact moment when life becomes death. Arya is balanced on that boundary right now. If anyone can help her step back toward life, either kind of life, it's you." Elena looked down at the child who had become her unlikely guide through this nightmare. "How do you know so much about what I do? About what any of this means?" "Because I was human once too," Lily replied, her young face suddenly ancient with memory. 80 years ago. I remember what it felt like to resist, to try to hold on to who I was. But I was alone. Arya has you." The weight of expectation settled on Elena's shoulders like a physical burden. These creatures were asking her to pioneer a medical procedure that bridged the supernatural and scientific, to save a life using knowledge that didn't officially exist. If she failed, a child would die. If she succeeded, she would be complicit in creating something that challenged the fundamental nature of human existence. Her phone's dark screen reflected the candlelight, a black mirror showing her own distorted face. By removing the battery, she had severed her connection to colleagues, protocols, the entire framework of accountability that had governed her professional life. There would be no second opinions here, no peer review, no possibility of sharing responsibility for the outcome. "If we do this," Elena said slowly, "if we attempt some kind of intervention, what happens afterward? To Arya, to me, to the knowledge of what we've done?" "Arya will live," Cassius said. "In what form, we cannot know. As for you," he paused, studying her face, "knowledge changes the knower, Dr. Vasquez. You will return to your world carrying secrets that will make your previous work seem hollow. Every autopsy, every death certificate, every courtroom testimony, you will wonder what supernatural possibilities you might be overlooking." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the last threads connecting her to her orderly, rational life beginning to snap. When she opened them again, her gaze fixed on Arya's pale face, and she saw not just this dying child but every patient she had failed to save, every mystery she had been too limited to solve. "Tell me how the venom works," she said, stepping toward the marble slab. "Tell me everything." Cassius moved to a second marble table Elena hadn't noticed before, its surface carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift in the candlelight. Ancient leather-bound journals lay open beside modern medical equipment, syringes, 4-tubing, electronic monitoring devices that looked decades ahead of anything in Elena's hospital. "The venom attacks the central nervous system first," he began, lifting one of the journals. The pages crackled with age as he turned them, revealing detailed anatomical drawings that were both precise and impossible. "It severs the connection between consciousness and mortality, creating a window where the soul can be redirected." Elena leaned closer, her scientific training overriding her revulsion. The drawings showed human neural pathways being systematically rewired, blood vessels adapting to carry substances that shouldn't exist. "These illustrations, how old are they?" "Centuries," Celeste replied, moving to Arya's side where she began adjusting the foreline with practiced efficiency. "We have been perfecting this process since the Renaissance, though we rarely attempt it on children. Their consciousness is too flexible, too resistant to controlled change. A new alarm joined the EEG monitor's urgent beeping. Elena glanced at her instruments and felt her stomach drop. Aria's heart rate was becoming dangerously erratic, rapid bursts followed by concerning pauses. Whatever internal battle was raging in the girl's suspended state, it was accelerating toward a critical point. "Dr. Vasquez!" a new voice called from the crypt's entrance. Elena turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, another vampire, but this one wore modern clothes and carried what appeared to be a medical bag. "I am Dr. Matthias Crane. I was turned in 1847 during my residency at Edinburgh Medical College." Elena stared at the newcomer, trying to process the cognitive dissonance. He looked perhaps 35, with the kind of classical features that suggested aristocratic breeding, but his eyes held the weight of nearly 2 centuries. When he extended his hand in greeting, his grip was firm and cold. "A vampire physician?" Elena managed. "I maintained my practice for decades after the transformation, advancing human medical knowledge while secretly developing techniques for our kind." He opened his medical bag, revealing instruments that blended Victorian craftsmanship with impossibly advanced technology. "I have been studying the integration challenges for longer than you have been alive." Dr. Crane moved to Aria's other side, pulling on latex gloves with movements that spoke of muscle memory, developed over lifetimes of practice. "The child's case is unique. Most transformation failures result in immediate death. The human system simply cannot accommodate supernatural physiology. But she has achieved a partial integration that defies our understanding." Elena watched him work, noting the professional competence that transcended species. "What makes her different?" "Unknown," he admitted, checking Aria's pupils with a penlight. "Her neurological patterns suggest she is maintaining conscious control over the transformation process. In effect, she is choosing which aspects of vampire physiology to accept and which to reject." The EEG monitor showed a sudden spike of activity, and Aria's lips moved soundlessly. Elena leaned closer, trying to read the girl's expression, when Lily suddenly gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Someone's coming," the child vampire whispered urgently. "Someone who shouldn't be here." The adult vampires tensed immediately, their heads turning toward the crypt entrance with predatory alertness. Elena heard it too, footsteps on stone, moving with purpose through the passages above. "The mother," Cassius said grimly. "I specifically instructed her to remain in London until the process was complete." Dr. Crane continued his examination without pausing, but Elena caught the tightness around his eyes. "This complicates matters significantly. The emotional connection between mother and child could disrupt—" "Aria!" A woman's voice echoed through the stone corridors, filled with desperate love and terror. "Where is my daughter? What have you done to her?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crypt's temperature. The approaching footsteps belonged to a mother seeking her child, the same desperate journey Elena had made countless times during Sophia's illness, racing through hospital corridors toward rooms that held too much uncertainty. "Dr. Vasquez," Cassius said quietly, "you must understand that Aria's mother cannot know the full truth of what we are attempting. The knowledge would destabilize her psychologically, which could affect the child through their emotional bond." "You want me to lie to her?" Elena's voice carried decades of professional ethics. "To a mother asking about her dying daughter?" "I want you to save the child," he replied simply. "Sometimes salvation requires temporary deception." The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the sound of Elena's colleagues calling her name. Dr. Morrison's voice, tight with concern. Inspector MacLeod demanding explanations. The rational world was catching up to them, threatening to shatter this impossible moment where death might be negotiable. Elena looked at Aria's failing monitors, at Dr. Crane's ancient instruments, at Lily's frightened face. In moments, she would have to choose between the supernatural hope offered by creatures of the night and the familiar comfort of human accountability. The EEG flatlined completely, and Aria stopped breathing. Elena's hands moved without conscious thought, 25 years of medical training overriding the impossibility of her surroundings. She placed her fingers against Arya's throat, searching for a pulse that wasn't there, then positioned her hands for chest compressions on the small, still form. "Wait," Dr. Crane said sharply, catching her wrists. His grip was ice-cold but gentle. "Human resuscitation will destroy what remains of the transformation. You'll kill her permanently." "She's already dead!" Elena's voice cracked as the monitor's flatline filled the crypt with its merciless tone. Brain activity ceased, respiration stopped, no pulse. "Death means something different here," Lily interrupted, her young face fierce with determination. "Show her, Dr. Crane. Show her what we can do." The vampire physician released Elena's hands and moved to his medical bag, withdrawing a syringe filled with the same prismatic liquid Elena had seen before. But this time, she noticed the subtle differences. This venom moved more slowly, with deliberate currents that suggested careful preparation. "Arya!" The desperate call echoed closer now, accompanied by multiple footsteps. "I know you're down there. I know what you're doing to my baby." "The mother will be here within minutes," Cassius said, his ancient composure finally showing cracks. "Dr. Morrison and the inspector as well. If they witness what comes next—" "Let them come," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm done with deception." She looked at the syringe in Dr. Crane's hands, then at Arya's lifeless face. "If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. That mother deserves to make an informed choice about her daughter's fate." Dr. Crane paused, the needle inches from Arya's foreport. "The shock could be devastating. Humans aren't prepared to confront the reality of what we are, what we offer." "I wasn't prepared either," Elena replied, checking her phone's dark screen from habit, before remembering she had disabled it. "But some decisions are too important to make alone." The footsteps reached the crypt entrance just as Dr. Crane hesitated, caught between Elena's conviction and centuries of supernatural secrecy. A woman burst through the doorway, mid-40s, auburn hair wild with panic, eyes that immediately fixed on her daughter's motionless form. "What have you done to her?" she screamed, rushing toward the marble slab. She was getting better. The experimental treatment in London was working. Behind her came Dr. Morrison, his face pale with exhaustion and confusion, followed by Inspector MacLeod, whose hand rested on his radio. Elena realized with crystal clarity that this moment would shatter multiple lives irreparably. The mother's desperate hope, Morrison's professional worldview, MacLeod's orderly universe of law and evidence, all of it would crumble in the next few minutes. "Mrs. Catherine Webb," Elena said, stepping between the distraught mother and the vampires. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. I've been monitoring your daughter's condition." "Monitoring?" Catherine's laugh was sharp with hysteria. "She's dead. Look at her. What kind of monitoring lets a child die in this medieval nightmare?" Elena felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The removed phone battery, the abandoned protocols, the acceptance of impossible truths. Behind her, she could sense the vampires preparing for either revelation or concealment, waiting for her to choose the direction of this collision between worlds. "Your daughter isn't dead," Elena said quietly. "But she isn't alive in any way you'll recognize. And what I'm about to tell you will sound like madness." Catherine's face went white. "What are you talking about? The monitors—" "The monitors are reading human physiology," Elena interrupted. "But Arya is transitioning to something else, something that might save her life but will change her fundamentally." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to professional concern. "Elena, you've been missing for hours. We need to get you back to Edinburgh for evaluation. This situation has clearly—" "Dr. Morrison," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of expertise. "Look at the readings. Really look at them. Tell me what you see that doesn't fit standard patterns." He approached reluctantly, but his clinical instincts engaged as he studied the monitors. Elena watched his face change as he processed the impossible data, brain activity that had occurred after cardiac, death, cellular responses that defied known biology. "This can't be accurate," he murmured. "The equipment must be malfunctioning." "It's not," Elena said simply. Then, turning to face Catherine directly, "Your daughter has cancer that conventional medicine cannot cure. These people," she gestured to the vampires, "offered an alternative, a transformation that would save her life but change her nature entirely. The process went wrong, and now she's trapped between human and something else." Catherine stared at her, then at the ancient faces surrounding her daughter. "You're all insane. This is some kind of elaborate—" Lily stepped forward, her child's face solemn with old knowledge. "Mrs. Webb, your daughter is dying right now. We can save her, but only if you let us complete what we started." The crypt fell silent, except for the flatline monitor's relentless tone. Catherine looked at her daughter's still form, at the impossible assembly of medical equipment and ancient ritual, at Elena's face that carried the weight of her own lost child. "Save her," Catherine whispered. "I don't care what she becomes, just save her." Dr. Crane raised the syringe. The needles slid into Arya's foreport with clinical precision, and Elena watched the prismatic liquid flow through transparent tubing into the child's lifeless body. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The monitors continued their flatline chorus, Catherine's ragged breathing the only sound of life in the ancient crypt. Then Arya's back arched violently off the marble slab. The flatline monitor exploded into chaotic spikes as Elena's carefully placed sensors registered impossible readings. Brain activity that should have been absent blazed across the EEG in patterns she had never seen. Delta waves mixed with frequencies that existed outside normal human ranges. Catherine screamed and lunged forward, but Cassius caught her with gentle, implacable strength. "Don't touch her," Dr. Crane commanded, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. "The transformation is fighting her human immune system. Any disruption now could tear her apart at the cellular level." Elena watched in horrified fascination as Arya's skin began to change. The deathly pallor was replaced by something that wasn't quite human coloring, too pale, with an underlying luminescence that seemed to pulse with her irregular heartbeat. Her fingernails lengthened into delicate points, then retracted, then extended again, as if her body couldn't decide what form to take. "What's happening to her?" Catherine's voice broke on the words. "What have you done to my little girl?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow, carrying her back 18 months to another hospital room, another mother's desperate vigil. She had asked the same question as Sophia's chemotherapy ravaged her small body, transforming her daughter into a stranger fighting battles no child should face. The memory threatened to paralyze her just when Arya needed her most focused. "Dr. Vasquez," Lily tugged at her sleeve urgently. "Look at the readings. Something's wrong." Elena forced herself back to the present, studying the monitors with professional detachment that felt like donning armor against the emotional chaos. The EEG showed brain activity, but it was fragmenting. Coherent patterns dissolving into static as if Arya's consciousness was being pulled apart by opposing forces. "She's rejecting the integration," Dr. Crane said grimly, adjusting something on his antique instruments. "Her human neural pathways are trying to reassert dominance, but they're too damaged by the cancer. Neither system can maintain control." "What does that mean?" Elena demanded, though part of her already knew. She had seen similar patterns in terminal patients, the moment when the body's competing systems began to shut down in cascade failure. "It means she's going to die twice," Cassius said quietly. "First as a human, then as what she might have become." Catherine broke free from his restraining grip and threw herself across her daughter's convulsing form, her tears falling on Arya's changing face. "No, you promised. You said you could save her." Elena stared at the failing readings, her mind racing through possibilities that had no foundation in medical school textbooks. The child was caught between two incompatible forms of existence, and conventional intervention would destroy what little remained of either. But there had to be something, some bridge between her scientific knowledge and this supernatural crisis. "The cancer," she said suddenly. "Dr. Crane, you said the transformation targets the central nervous system. What about the malignant cells? How does vampire physiology interact with human disease? His ancient eyes sharpened with understanding. The venom attacks any foreign presence in the host body. In theory, it should destroy the cancer, but Arya's immune system is fighting the venom instead of working with it. Elena finished. She needs to stop resisting the transformation long enough for it to eliminate the cancer, then we can help her establish a stable hybrid state. Impossible, Dr. Morrison interjected, his voice strained beyond recognition. You're talking about deliberately inducing a supernatural pathogen to treat cancer. The very suggestion violates every principle of medical ethics. Elena looked at her colleague, a man she had respected for years, whose rational worldview had anchored her own. But as Arya's convulsions intensified, and the monitors showed increasingly erratic patterns, Elena felt the last threads of her old life snapping. Then maybe our principles are too narrow, she said, moving to the marble slab. Lily, can you communicate with her? If Arya is maintaining some level of consciousness, we need to reach her. The child vampire nodded and placed her small hands on either side of Arya's fevered face. She's so scared, Lily whispered after a moment. She can feel herself changing and she's trying to hold on to who she was. But the cancer is like fire inside her mind. Elena felt Catherine's desperate gaze, Dr. Morrison's professional horror, Inspector MacLeod's shocked silence. Every person in this crypt was being forced to confront the impossible, and the choices they made in the next few minutes would echo through the rest of their lives. Arya's eyes suddenly opened, not the blue they had been, but something between human and otherness, filled with intelligence and terror. "Mama," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't produce. "I can't find my way back." Elena's heart shattered as Arya's transformed voice echoed through the crypt, so much like Sophia's final words, when her own daughter had looked at her with eyes clouded by morphine and whispered that she couldn't find her way home. The parallel was devastating and immediate, threatening to drag Elena into the paralyzing grief she had fought for 18 months. "I'm here, sweetheart," Catherine sobbed, stroking her daughter's fevered brow. "Mama's here. Just follow my voice." But even as the words left Catherine's lips, Arya's newly opened eyes began to roll back, the brief spark of consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. The EEG readings that had offered momentary hope dissolved into chaos, not the organized patterns of vampire transformation Dr. Crane had described, but the wild firing of a nervous system destroying itself. "She's seizing," Elena announced, her clinical training reasserting itself even as her heart broke. She reached for Arya's convulsing form, then stopped as Dr. Crane's warning echoed. Human intervention would kill her permanently. How long can she survive this? Dr. Crane's face was grim as he monitored his antique instruments. Minutes at most. The competing physiologies are creating a cascade failure. Her human brain cannot process vampire neural pathways, but the transformation has progressed too far to reverse. "There has to be something," Elena insisted, scanning the monitors desperately for any sign of stability, some way to ease the transition, to give her system time to adapt. A new alarm suddenly pierced the air, not from Arya's monitors, but from Elena's phone, which buzzed to life in her pocket despite the disabled battery. The screen displayed an incoming call from Edinburgh General Hospital, and Elena's blood turned to ice as she recognized the extension, the morgue. "Dr. Vasquez," the voice crackled through poor reception. "We have a problem with the Blackmore examination. The body you were supposed to analyze, it's gone. Security footage shows it simply vanished from the examination table, and there's something else. We ran the DNA sample you requested yesterday, and the results—" Elena's hand trembled as she answered, dread building in her chest. "What results?" "The child's DNA shows familial markers consistent with your daughter Sophia. The similarities are impossible to explain through coincidence. Doctor, how is this connected to your current location? Your GPS shows you're at Blackmore Estate, but that's supposed to be—" The call cut to static as Elena stared at Arya's transforming features, seeing with horrible clarity what she had been too desperate to acknowledge. The bone structure was Sophia's, The shape of the ears, the curve of the chin, details a mother's eye would never forget, now twisted by supernatural change into something that mocked her deepest grief. "You knew," she whispered, turning to face Cassius with fury building in her chest. "You knew she looked like my daughter. That's why you called me specifically, not for my expertise, but because your emotional investment would ensure your cooperation," Cassius admitted, his ancient composure finally cracking. "The resemblance is not coincidence, Dr. Vasquez. Arya is Sophia's biological half-sister, separated at birth through circumstances we helped orchestrate decades ago. We have been watching both children, waiting to see which would develop the genetic markers necessary for successful transformation." The words hit Elena like physical blows, each revelation worse than the last. Sophia's sister. But that means, when Sophia was dying, you knew there was another child who might— Her voice broke as the implications crashed over her. "You let my daughter die when you might have saved her, so you could experiment on this one." Catherine's scream of anguish filled the crypt as Arya's convulsions intensified, but Elena barely heard it through the roaring in her ears. Dr. Morrison stepped protectively closer, his face pale with shock, while Inspector MacLeod's hand moved to his radio, finally understanding that something far beyond his jurisdiction was unfolding. "The transformation is failing completely," Dr. Crane announced, his voice tight with professional defeat. "Her human genetics are too strong. She cannot become what we hoped, and the attempt has accelerated the cancer's progression. I estimate perhaps an hour before complete neural collapse." Elena stared at the monitors showing Arya's failing vital signs, at Catherine's desperate face, at the assembled vampires who had manipulated her grief for their own purposes. Every choice had led to this moment of absolute failure. She couldn't save Arya, couldn't bring back Sophia, couldn't even maintain the illusion that she was acting from pure medical ethics rather than selfish desperation. Lily suddenly gripped Elena's arm, her child's face streaked with tears that seemed impossibly human. "It's starting," she whispered, her voice carrying a terror that made everyone freeze. "The ritual we tried before, when it failed, it left something behind, something that feeds on failed transformations." From somewhere in the darkness beyond the crypt's ancient walls came a sound that raised every hair on Elena's neck. Not quite human, not quite animal, but hungry in a way that spoke of endless need. The careful medical atmosphere of the makeshift treatment room suddenly felt fragile as paper against whatever was approaching through the stone corridors. As Arya's monitors flatlined once again, Elena realized with crushing certainty that she had lost everything: her daughter's sister, her professional integrity, and now possibly their lives to something far worse than death.